just struck me that had I remembered at any point that I was giving this sermon right after Yizkor, I might have started it differently. But what I have in front of me is what I have in front of me. It's a great introduction to a sermon, isn't it? I wish I could start this sermon differently. You'll see why in about 10 seconds. Sometimes we set out to write a sermon, and sometimes the sermon ends up writing us. Wednesday morning, Rabbi Yolkut needed a third rabbi to quickly serve as a witness in the mikvah. So she texted me and Lauren. She said, "Can one of you drop down for a minute?" I happened to be physically closer, and so I headed downstairs. The immersion was for a baby girl. She was in the mikvah with her parents. Her grandparents were outside waiting, so we did introductions. It's all fairly normal. A few minutes later, the grandchild was going in the mikvah. Her bubby asked me, I don't know if she is a bubby, but she struck me as a bubby. She said, are you an Alexander, like Alexander Muss High School in Israel, Alexander? I said, no relation, I said. But I did go to HSI, and my mom worked for HSI for about 10 years, coordinating recruitment in South Florida. Really, she said, I worked for HSI. Who's your mom? I said, Linda Barry Hurst. And then, oh my, I'm sorry. I knew your mom very well. We traveled to Israel together several times. And of course, me being me, I'm gonna lose it right there. My mom's in the room. You see the Yizkor sermon thing? It's like hit much better last night without Yizkor right before. She was in the room, like her giant aura. And then like the moment she's there, I'm like, oh, I wonder what my mom would be doing today. It was Wednesday. I'm sure she'd be checking in on my sister Julie, who lives in Orlando, before Milton arrives there. I need to do that, I remind myself. And then I'm in Israel again. I'm 17 years old. I can taste the Hod HaSharon falafel. I can feel Masada under my feet. Then I'm 23 again, and I'm struggling over a passage of Talmud in yeshiva while the second intifada is swirling around me, like really close around me. And then I'm 48 again, just a few months ago, 49 now. And I'm back in Kfar Aza, the burnt out ruins of Kfar Aza, looking over into Gaza with residents of Kfar Aza. And then I'm unborn. I'm standing in the Sinai desert, or maybe I'm standing at Sinai and I'm waiting for revelation. And in an instant of somebody saying, I knew your mom, I'm living in my past. My present is totally changed, and I'm thinking about my future. Jonathan Safran Foer, he perfectly defines this kind of memory in Everything is Illuminated. For Jews, he wrote, memory is no less primary than a prick of a pin. The Jew is pricked by a pin and remembers other pins. The Jew is only able to know why it hurts by tracing the pinprick back to other pinpricks when his mother tried to fix his sleeve while his arm was still in it, when his grandfather's fingers fell asleep from stroking his great-grandfather's damp forehead, when Abraham tested the knife point to be sure Isaac would feel no pain. When a Jew encounters a pin, Foer said, he asks, what does it remember like? What does it remember like? On Rosh Hashanah, I foreshadowed this sermon. I informed you all I would respond to a religious school parent's small question, what does it mean to be Jewish? And if you missed that sermon, this one will stand on its own. But I'm going to give just a quick review, keep us all together. Number one, any definition of what it means to be a Jew requires an acknowledgement of this precondition. We are all of us Aravim ze bazeh, inextricably intertwined, guarantor one for the other. No matter how divided we are, we cannot escape one another's fate. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik wrote this in 1956. He said, even though we may speak a mix of different languages, even if we are citizens of different lands, even if we look different, we have but one fate. When the Jew in the cave is attacked, Soloveitchik wrote, security of the Jew standing in the courtyard of the king is jeopardized. The suffering of one segment of the nation is the lot of the entire community. And I quoted Dr. Leora Botnitsky, who said, we learn nothing about ourselves as a people from anti-Semites. We learn nothing about ourselves, about who we are, from anti-Semites. We must define who we are on our own terms within our own values. And now here we are, and it's Yom Kippur, and I have to say it would be a significant act of hubris for me to try and define what it means to be Jewish in 2024. Because even if we do achieve an authentic expression of arevut, guarantorship, one for the other, we must still admit that any definition of Jewish identity will not only fall short, but it will more likely create thicker, more exclusive dividing lines. An authoritative voice as to what it means to be Jewish, one of us dictating to another, I don't want that. We are divided politically, religiously, and culturally. We have faithful and frum and atheists and agnostics. We have traditionalists and progressive. We have Zionists, progressive Zionists, non-Zionists, and anti-Zionists. We have religious and secular, kosher and non-kosher, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Taimani. We are every color under the sun, thank God. And still, lefi aniyut dati, with a reasonable measure of humility, I am still going to try to answer the question. For me, and maybe it will speak to you as well, to be a Jew means to actively live with a particular kind of eternal memory. Not memory in the I remember that happened sense. It's less linear. It reaches backwards and forwards at once. Jewish memory isn't history. Jewish memory is certainly not historiography, though those things are important, very important. Dr. Masua Sagiv, a senior fellow at the Hartman Institute, captures this. She writes about Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi that he emphasizes throughout his famous book, Zachor, that memory is not history. Jewish memory is not an accurate telling of what happened in the past. Jewish memory does not treat the past as remote, as something that happened long ago in a different place to a different people. Jewish memory is alive in our present. It is selected and constructed by us as active participants of the memory. I believe this memory is the heart and soul of Jewish living. It is not passive. It is ritual in and of itself. We just experienced that. It is layered into every generation. Jewish memory is a transcendent collapse of time, and it is the thread that binds every Jewish generation together in this impossible story. But we have millions of pages, countless debates, important personalities in every era. We have 613 commandments which have expanded into thousands of obligations and prohibitions and customs, and we have 3,000 years of significance. Who gets to decide what gets emphasized as a primary aspect of Jewish memory? Who gets to decide what gets set aside? I do. At least today. In almost every Orthodox prayer book, there's a short bundle of Torah verses after the final mourner's Kaddish to be recited and internalized by individuals at the conclusion of every service. The Shesh Zichronot, the 6 remembrances, 6 short pieces of Torah curated out of chronology, out of context, identifying particular moments in the Israelite story where the Torah itself commands us to zachor, to remember. The mitzvah of reciting instances in the Torah where the Torah itself commands us to remember is attributed first to a 16th century mystic scholar, the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria. The 6 remembrances don't actually appear codified as a unit until the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, includes them in his Sidur. That's the 18th century. So I'm going to share with you the Sheish Zichronot in the Torah's words and my own. Number one, first thing a Jew is obligated to remember every day, right after praying. Remember the day you left Egypt, all the days of your life. Laman tizkor et yom tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yomei chayecha. Remember the feeling of redemption, of being given a chance to venture out on your own, offered the possibility of agency and self-determination after prolonged degradation. This wasn't a past event, your exodus, your liberation. You still need now what I gifted you then, 372 days of hostages. People all around you still need to feel exactly what I, God, gifted you then, liberation. The second remembrance, Sinai, Rak hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od pen tishkach yom asher amadata lifnei Adonai Elohecha bechorev. Guard yourself, do not forget what you saw with your own eyes when you stood at Sinai before God and received Torah. You better teach those to your children, the Torah says. We were at Sinai. Our story ended up at Sinai for one reason and one reason only, and no other reason but that only one reason, Torah. That's it. We are still at Sinai today, yesterday, and we will be tomorrow for only one reason, Torah. You are still at Sinai. Receive it, learn it, swim in it, pass it on. If Sinai ends, if living, expanding Torah is divorced from Jewish memory, living memory, our story ends. Exodus, Sinai. Number 3, Amalek. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeitchem miMitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Amalek, undeterred by fear of God, surprised you on the march. You were famished and you were weary, and Amalek cut down the stragglers, the weakest among you, those in the rear. The third remembrance is that evil exists. This is a year in which I certainly don't have to remind anybody of that. 6 days from October 7th. There are dark stories that we must tell. Those who will, without remorse, brutalize the most vulnerable in any society will never disappear from this earth. Amalek is a paradigm. It knows no one party, no one border, no one DNA, no one religion. It is possible anywhere because humans are everywhere. So God says, don't forget this. Notice it when it's happening. Please do not try to deny what it is. Always confront it. Number 4, the golden calf. Zachor al tishkach asher ksafta et Adonai Elohecha bamidbar. Remember, never forget how you provoked your God to anger in the wilderness with idolatry. The entire point of this project, God says, me, God choosing you, the Israelites, then and now, I still believe, it's not because you're amazing. It's definitely not because you're more special than any other people. In fact, God says throughout the Torah, you more often than not don't meet my expectations. You don't come close. And the primary source of that defiance is idolatry, the elevation of things or persons to godlike, demagogic power. Don't do it. Number 5, the sin of Miriam. Zachor et asher asa Adonai Elohecha leMiriam baderech b'tzeitchem miMitzrayim. Remember what God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt, when she spoke slander against her brother Moshe. What we say or write materially matters. Slander is a sin. It degrades. It leaves bruised both the speaker and the target of such speech. What was true for Miriam is true for all of us, each of us. Slander is seductive. It's easy, and it is near impossible to repair. So God says, pause before you post. Pause before you pass it along. and certainly pause before you forward it along. Lastly, number 6, Shabbat. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Sometimes we have to stop. We are not meant to run on empty. If you heard Rabbi Holzblatt's sermon last night, you understand. Our bodies may keep moving, but our souls wither more easily than we'd like to admit. So God says, I'm going to temporarily force you to abstain from producing. And not just that, I'm going to demand that others stop using you as a means to an end. Shabbat is Egypt's opposite. Every time any one of us steps into Shabbat, we are stepping into anti-Egypt. So forge sacred stopping time and carefully guard it. Those are the 6 remembrances you will find after the last mourner's Kaddish in every Orthodox Siddur that is printed. Liberation, revelation, evil, idolatry, slander, and Shabbat. Liberation, revelation, evil, idolatry, slander, and Shabbat. 6 ways to enter fully into the story as we are now, not as a reading of history, but as a what is happening around us in the world. Rabbi David Bleicher, a Ukrainian rabbi, he was killed in the Holocaust in 1944. He said about these 6, a defect in one's remembrance of these 6 events is not an incidental problem. It's a critical issue, and I agree. And I look forward to our own conservative movement one day, including the Shesh Zichronot in a Siddur that we print. I'm not holding my breath. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be a Jew? For me, it means to marinate in Zachor and Zecher and Zichron and Hazkara and Ela Azkara and Yizkor, to inhabit remembering as an act that is beyond time, La'ela Ula'ela, to live the very formative moments that have shaped who we are and who we are still becoming. What does it remember like? We ask about events that long precede us or haven't even happened yet. On Rosh Hashanah, I also owned my tribalism, which grew this year, and I qualified it. I said, do I do this at the expense of Jewish universalism? I don't. Tribalism without universalism is a recipe for extremism, dangerous nationalism, but universalism without thoughtful tribalism is a recipe for erasing Judaism. Finding the balance between the two, not relenting on either, is simply Jewish. And I think the Zichronot do really well with the tribal universal interpretation. I'm going to show you with just one of them, Exodus and liberation. In almost every instance that the Torah reminds us that we were once slaves, then redeemed, it does so in order to warn us against indifference to oppression or becoming oppressors ourselves. In the Torah, we are headed towards the land. We will be in power there. Our tribe's religion will supplant the pervasive idolatry. It might even eradicate it, but it can't happen at the expense of the marginalized among us. Our own national self-determination is most certainly a right, and the entire point of the Torah. It's tribal. It's our story. I will go to the grave with that. But if it only turns us inward, away from the suffering of others, we fail to Jewishly remember the Exodus. This means locally, Cleveland Park can not only care about Shepherd Park, it's got to care about Congress Heights in Ward 8 as well. This means more globally or Jewishly, I will never give up nor hide my Zionism. I will never give up nor hide it. Our self-determination in the modern world, ever. And I will not pause hoping for, speaking about, and advocating for that same self-determination and liberation for Palestinians, even when it feels impossible, as it does for so many right now. Why? Because my Zionism is in my DNA, but my universal Exodus story is also in my DNA. It is in all of our DNA. It is how we Jewishly remember. Look, some people here might disagree with either clause of that last statement. In Yeshivish, the Resha or the Seifa, the first half or the second half. I believe our story asks us to hold the tension of both without letting that cord rip apart. The Exodus is tribal. It's our story. It will always be our story, but to live with Jewish memory means to be a people who can very carefully universalize it into any present, including the most difficult ones. If this is hard for you to hear from me, I was ready for that. Rabbi Daniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, said on last week's For Heaven's Sake podcast, when talking about this, when talking about the wars, when talking about Iran, when talking about the occupation, he said, "I'm not passionate about resolving the Palestinian conflict because it's a conflict that endangers us. I'm passionate about it because there's an injustice living in our midst. It's like," this Rabbi Hartman said, he goes, "it's like I don't want to be that people. I don't want to be that," which is exactly why we were warned in the Torah about becoming oppressors ourselves. Rabbi Hartman is just channeling what the Torah is teaching. Okay, can everyone just take a breath now? I'm going to switch topics. I want to say one more thing about tribalism, which I do love. I love it. Otherwise, what the hell would I be doing in this job? A lot of people here have asked me about the ceremony at the White House this past Monday on October 7th. Why didn't the president say anything? He didn't say anything about Israelis. He didn't say anything about Palestinians. He didn't talk about Iran. I was like, I don't know. I forgot to interrupt him during this moment of silence. Look, there's a lot to say, obviously, about October 7th and its aftermath. And he's on the record. You can find everything he said the day before and the day after. There's only one story from Monday for me. There's only one story from this past Monday. It's a tribal story. The president and the first lady of the most powerful nation in the world. This makes me cry just thinking about it. The president and the first lady of the most powerful nation in the world, Israel, and the Jewish people's enduring ally, asked to light a Yortzeit candle and commemorate the latest Jewish tragedy in front of the entire world. That's remarkable. He didn't want to speak. He didn't qualify the moment. He just wanted to mourn with us, to step into our own pain when so many others would deny it. So many others on October 7th itself would deny our pain. He stepped right into it, and I felt his empathy overwhelmingly pour out of his body. Did it erase that moment, other loss and suffering and frustration in the world? It didn't. Tribal moments, particular moments, it's not a zero-sum equation. Neither is pain. So thank you, Mr. President, for a lot, but especially for the painful silence that you shared with us on Monday. It meant something. It mattered. Exodus and liberation can be both tribal, can be both tribal and universal. A few days after our 6 hostages were shot and killed in Gaza tunnels, Shiva gatherings started throughout Israel, and a story emerged. Prime Minister Netanyahu made a Shiva call to Rabbi Elchanan and Einav Danino, the Haredi parents of murdered hostage Ori Danino. Ori, light, may his memory be for a blessing. was just 25 years old. He was secular, but no less loved by his parents. He was an off-duty soldier, a paratrooper, and he was taken from the Nova Music Festival. Ori was a hero. He had a chance to escape, and he went back, and he saved Itai and Mia Regev, who were released when I was in Israel in late November, early December. He saved their lives. And he went back for Omer Shem Tov. If you want to see his picture, look at the 101 who remain in Gaza that we believe, God willing, please are alive. Because he's still underneath it somewhere. Or he saved their lives. Somehow, the interaction at the Shiva between Bibi and Rabbi Danino turned political. Loud. Israeli. I can only imagine the overflowing emotions present in that space. And after they had a heated exchange, Rabbi Danino said to Bibi, "Shut down your office for 10 minutes a day and think about where your Jewish values are. Shut it down, send everyone out, no phones, spend time with your Creator and think, where is God in your picture? Where are your Jewish values?" I'm not taking a cheap shot at Bibi. I'm really not. I was moved when I read that story by what Rabbi Danino was asking of him. Essentially, take the paradigm of the 6 remembrances as a methodology for self-definition and actualization as a Jew. As if Rabbi Danino was saying to the prime minister, when you come out of that room after reflecting on who you are and where you've come from, what does everything you are feeling and experiencing and seeing in this country right now, what does it remember like? Does it remember Jewish to you right now or not? To be Jewish is to carve out moments for intentionally, particularly, and expansively situating ourselves ahistorically in the ongoing story. To let the messages float from the past to the present towards the future, to ritualize them, beautify them, teach them, live them thoughtfully and proudly. There's no better example of this than Yom Kippur. We just read the ritual of Azazel, the scapegoat in the desert. In an hour, we are going to be painstakingly going through the Avodah service, the entrance of the high priest to the Holy of Holies. We're going to be talking about each cut of the knife. And we are all today, whether you knew this or not, we are all reenacting the future. We are all reenacting our death. That's why we wear white. That's why those of us who are able only deprive themselves of physical needs. It is why we confess our sins as if tomorrow might be our last tomorrow. And you know what? Not one of us can be sure that that's not true. What does Yom Kippur remember like? A Jew asks on Yom Kippur. We do this work here all year long. Services, classes, chesed, justice. We identify memory. We bring that memory back to life. We anticipate its potential, and then we renew it over and over and over again. What does it mean to be Jewish? What it has always meant to be Jewish. From Egypt to Sinai, from Babylonia to Spain, from Riga to Treblinka, from Cairo to Columbia University, from Ben Yehuda Street to Quebec Street. Our past is still our present. Our present is still our past. And it's also partially our future. And the future depends on whether we can purposefully, thoughtfully collect all of it together without letting the Jewish eternity we find ourselves in snap. And so today, I ask each of us and myself, what does this remember like for you? The answer to that question is the beginning of the next year. Gemar Chatima Tova.